right, we are going live.
You'll tell me when I should be able to see something?
Yeah, it's probably recording us right now. So, hey folks, welcome to YouTube. It's Rob Avis with Verge Permaculture, and I'm here with New Society Publishers as well as Rare Hare Barn. So we're going to get started with this live stream here in about 3 minutes. And if you're just signing in, I'd love for you to let us know where you're calling in from. If somebody on the live stream can do a sound check, I think I probably had a bit of feedback there just initially because my volume wasn't off. So if you guys can give me a sound check, that'd be great. So if you're just signing in, let us know where you're calling in from, and let us know one thing that you hope to get out of today's show, which is going to be all about raising rabbits. We have probably one of North America's leading experts, I guess two of North America's leading experts on raising rabbits for meat. But also what's really unique about them is that they didn't actually get into this to start in the meat business. So they're actually really interested in breed preservation and genetics. So today is going to be a really interesting show. I've been reading this book for the last couple of weeks, sometimes even to my kids before bed, just to make sure that I get through it. And not that it's been a hard book. In fact, my kids are really into raising rabbits right now. We just got rabbits recently. And so this book has been really great information for us to set up our own little rabbitry here in Calgary, Alberta. So again, if you're just signing in, let us know where you're calling in from and one thing that you hope to get about out of today's show. And we'll be starting the show here right away. So, all right. So Dave Beatty, all good here in Ontario. That's great. Thanks for doing that sound check. Hey, Kathy, how's it going? Nice to see you again. It's great to have you on the show again. I've noticed that you've been coming to a lot of our live streams in the last little while. All right, folks, we're going to start up real quick here. So just remember to introduce yourself in the chat window, and I'm going to just set up a couple of settings here, and then we're going to get started on this this interview here. So, Sarah, did you manage to get the link on your end? Perfect. Okay, great. Hey, Northern Bloom. Jen, nice to see you. You're always on our shows. It's great to see you again. And I noticed that you're in the greenhouse course too. That's awesome. Really excited about that. And I think I might owe you an email, actually. I tend to remember that I owe you emails when we go live on YouTube here. All right, folks. Well, we're going to get kicked off here. So as some of you are aware, Michelle and I over the last year, actually 2 years, have been writing a book. And do we have a copy of it, Michelle? There we go. Perfect. We just wrote this book with New Society, Essential Rainwater Harvesting. And as a result of writing this book, we got to know the folks over at New Society Publishers really well. And we really like them. And we really like the books that they publish. Probably because we're a little bit biased. We like our book a whole bunch. And anyways, as a result of this, we started trying to brainstorm ideas on how we could collaborate further with them. And we came up with this concept called Ideas on the Verge, where I'm going to be interviewing incredible authors twice a month over the next 12 months, sharing those books with our community and my insights, the insights that I have as a result of reading these books, so that you guys can better judge whether that book is going to be something that's going to help push your projects forward with the right information. So what's really neat about this project, Ideas on the Verge, is that New Society has co-partnered with us, and as a result of being on our Ideas on the Verge newsletter, folks that sign into these live interviews will have 48 hours after the interview to purchase the book at a 25% discount, which is incredibly generous. And in addition to that, one person today will be receiving the book for free. So if you stay right till the very end, we'll be selecting somebody within the group of people that have signed in to listen to this interview to get a free book. And we'll give you some details on that a little bit later. So with me today, I have Sarah Reeves from New Society Publishers. She's the marketing director over there. and she's been an absolute joy to work with. So Sarah, I'll let you do a little introduction for yourself there and talk a little bit about this collaboration from New Society's perspective.
Thanks very much, Rob. I'm really excited to be here. For those of you who don't know, New Society is an activist, solutions-oriented publisher. We really pride ourselves on walking our talk, and having the highest environmental and social standards of any publisher in North America. So this includes things like we print all of our books on 100% post-consumer recycled paper. We print only in North America and never overseas. We've also been a carbon neutral company since 2006, and our employees are shareholders in the company. And we've also recently become B certified. So we really believe that what we publish, we need to also reflect in our business practices as well. We're thrilled to be able to collaborate with Verge Permaculture on this project. I really think that the sharing of ideas and information on as many platforms as possible is key to creating community and real change in the world. So I also really want to give a shout out to all of our authors for their willingness to share their often hard-won knowledge and expertise with readers. It can be really comforting when embarking on a new project or contemplating new ideas to know that someone else has been through it before you and can walk you through it and helping you miss those many potholes that may reveal themselves along the way. So thanks very much to Callene and Eric for joining us, and for Rob for the collaboration. We're really excited about it.
Awesome. So last week, or the last week that we did an interview, we actually interviewed Chris Magwood on his book, Sustainable Home Design, and it was really well attended, and it's been tracking really well on YouTube. And so you can still find this video if you go over to to our Verge Permaculture YouTube channel. There's actually a playlist called Ideas on the Verge. So all of these videos will be popped up there and populated. So you can go watch Chris Magwood's video from last week over there. And then in 2 weeks from now, I'm really excited to be interviewing Dmitry Orlov with his book, The 5 Stages of Collapse. I've been really, I don't know if enjoying this book is the right word, only because it covers some pretty dense material. I've been enjoying it from what's the word, an academic perspective. And I think a lot about the stuff that Dmitry is talking about in here. It feels like we share a brain, perhaps. So I'm going to be really interested in interviewing him about this in a couple of weeks. So if you want to be notified about that, you can find information on all of our interviews by signing up for Ideas on the Verge, the newsletter, and the link is in the show notes directly below this video. So you can sign up over there, and you'll be given an email once a week with a reminder, as well as the coupon code after this show. So folks, if you're just signing in, let us know where you're calling in from. And I'm really curious to know one thing that you want to get out of today's show. With experts like Callene and Eric on the show today, we were just talking before we went live, and they've got literally about 30 years of experience each, which is, over 60 years of experience raising rabbits, which is just absolutely incredible. So we're really thrilled to have two people with that level of expertise be able to talk about a subject at this level of depth today. So if you're interested in learning something specific about rabbits, start putting your comments up into the comment section. Ask whatever questions you have, and we'll make sure we round our wagons at the end there and pick up on those questions so that we don't miss any of them. So like I said, Eric and Callene run Rare Hare Barn in the US. I believe it's the largest rabbitry in the United States, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. They've each got over 30 years of experience. And welcome, guys. Do you guys want to give me a little introduction? And I'm really curious, actually, what got you into rabbitry all those years ago?
Okay, well, I have to apologize because we'll start off correcting you. We don't have the largest rabbitry in the US. We do have, to the best of our knowledge, the largest rabbitry that focuses solely on heritage breeds.
Okay.
There are some that are larger, but they don't specialize in the heritage breeds like what we focus on. And how we got started, and jump in here anytime, honey. had just gotten sick and tired of food recall after food recall and not really being able to trust our food supply. And Eric basically has raised rabbits since he was big enough to carry a feed bucket for his granddad. And so he just said, well, we could try raising some rabbits. I don't have a problem processing them. We can do this. And I was like, okay, I've never eaten rabbit in my life, but I've never run across much in the way of food I wasn't willing to try. So that's just kind of where we started. And it just kind of grew from there.
Awesome. So yesterday we talked about some of the old books that you guys have in your library, and some of the ads that you guys had found in those older books. And what were the numbers that you were saying? There was an ad for pelts.
There was one fur processor that was looking for 5 million pelts.
Right. And that would have been like a one-shot deal sort of thing.
Yeah. And that's just one person at that time. So my question is, how many rabbits were there in production for there to be that many pelts available to be sold at any given time?
And what's your estimate?
It would be hard to come up with a number because it's one doe you can get 2 to 4 litters a year. And if they have 6, if you start doing the math, the number gets bigger than 5 million. So, and at one time that was really the meat source before we got into poultry confinement, hog confinement, and beef got to be such a processed animal. So it was a pretty large industry back in the late 1900s up through about the 40s to 50s probably.
And so what do you think, I mean, you maybe alluded to it just in your last comment there, but what do you think led to its demise or to its decline is maybe a better word?
I think it has a lot to do with the same things that have been factors in the decline of the true family farm. A lot of people have moved to the cities because that's where jobs are. We have an increasingly urbanized population. Food has become more industrial. Meat production has become obviously a lot more industrial, and it just became easier for people to acquire, beef and pork and poultry and things like that. They were able to acquire their food without raising it, and so rabbit just kind of, fell out of the mainstream.
Right. And so would you say that rabbitry or raising rabbits both in a backyard and also a rural setting is on the rise right now?
I think it is, just based on some of the, inquiries we've gotten, and just the, when we've done presentations at Mother Earth News fairs and things like that, I think a lot of people are getting back to being interested in rabbits, for their home use.
And do you think that it is a similar reason to why you guys got into it all those years ago?
I think so. I think people are just, I think a lot of people don't really trust the food system anymore. And it makes at least it makes me feel good to know that I'm doing something to help put the healthiest food I can, into our bodies, and, just having a little bit of control and a little bit of ownership in that process.
Totally. So I was on your website yesterday, and it looks like you guys have some kind of primary breeds that you guys steward. Can you talk a little bit about those breeds and why you've chosen them?
The ones we basically worked with were ones that I'd been exposed to back in my childhood with my granddad and my mom were raising. So I knew something about the breeds and the potential of them as far as a meat source. And the hardest part was relocating those rabbits again, because mostly what was available was show type rabbits that really weren't being utilized as meat. So we waited about 2 years to get our first breeding stock. We got on a list, and most of it was concentrated in Indiana, where a lot of the old breeders that had the old heritage breeds were located. And I don't know if that's where a lot of those people settled and they still were self-sufficient and hung on to those breeds. But if it wasn't for some of those old breeders, some of these breeds that we've worked with would probably be extinct, because they just, when the fur industry went out, and then so went the meat production of it, and then it switched to pet rabbits. And you can go to any of the American Rabbit Breeder Association national shows and see 22 to 24,000 rabbits and guinea pigs in any show. And it's kind of become more popular here recently that the heritage breeds are starting to work themselves into that pipeline. But years ago, you couldn't find a heritage rabbit at any of the national shows.
Wow, that's crazy. And so which of the breeds that you guys have chosen to steward?
Okay, we've had the Blanc de Hauteux,
Which is French.
Which is French. Pardon my pronunciation for any French speakers out there. The American Blue and White, Silver Fox, and then the American Chinchilla are the breeds that we have primarily focused on. We've had Cream d'Argents and a couple other breeds over the years, but it has been the American Chinchilla, American Blue and White, and the Silver Fox that have been the backbone of our meat production.
Okay, cool. And you said, are all those traditionally, they were meat or fur breeds then?
They were. Those three were actually breeds that were developed in the United States, and their purpose was to be dual purpose rabbits. The fur was as desirable a product as the meat. They're all three very different looking, different fur, and that was basically the drive behind the creation of those breeds.
Right.
Well, and the American Chinchilla was actually a rabbit that made one of the biggest breeders in the country, over $1 million during the Depression. And it's kind of a testament to that rabbit, because as far as what research we've done, that rabbit is, to me, the best production rabbit as far as the meat they'll produce, the number of babies they'll produce, and they're pretty low maintenance. And so that's pretty much the nucleus of what we've worked with, because it just, when you start putting numbers to a lot of things, the quicker you can get them to the market weight you want them at, or what harvest weight you're wanting them for home use, cuts down on the cost of your protein.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just in Newfoundland, and we did a circumnavigation of the island, which is on the east coast of Canada, that has a fairly large sealing trade. And there was a big long story about the state of the industry in terms of seal hides and things like that for the production of clothing and shoes and different things. And it kind of strikes me that there might be a similar PR issue with rabbits as well. And what's crazy is that when the oil and gas industry kind of emerged in the world almost 100 and some years ago, as we've invented synthetic fibers, it's kind of put a bit of a reduction, I guess, in natural fibers. And I really hope that people start to adopt the use of these pelts again. You don't see, I personally haven't seen a lot of stores selling clothing made out of rabbit furs and things
Right.
like that. But are you guys seeing a trend towards that?
I'm not sure you could call it a trend. We've seen, like at one of the hunting supply places, they had some rabbit fur caps that actually looked to be authentic. It looked like chinchilla pelts, but I'm not sure if it was or not. So I think there is some interest, but it's kind of a hard sell sometimes.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, if someone was going to get into raising rabbit, what sorts of skill and equipment would they require?
Well, I'll let you address the equipment part of the question, but I mean, as far as skill, Probably the best skill that will benefit anybody getting into any type of livestock, number one is probably patience. It's not, there's no instant rabbit starter kit. It takes time and you have to, be willing to put in the work. But I think the other thing is a good ability to be observant, because your animals will tell you what they need and, everything like that, but you have to be able to kind of pay attention. And as far as equipment, you're the equipment dude.
Well, equipment cost can vary. It depends on how in depth and what model you want to make for the rabbits and how much time you have to spend, taking care of them. A lot of times what happens is the rabbits are purchased and then it becomes an everyday chore. It's kind of, with the volume we have, I tell people it's like dairying. It's 24/7. Any livestock, once you put them under your chore set, they're dependent on you for water, feed, comfort, and it's real easy to, chickens are a lot easier than rabbits because they can kind of free range and you can bring them in at night. And so it just depends on what model you want to raise your rabbits in. But there's different qualities of materials as far as wire and whether you modify the front of your building or it's totally enclosed. Here we can have all 4 seasons in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're pretty much, and we have predators, hawks, owls, stuff, things that want to visit rabbits. So it just depends on, you have to just kind of sit down at the big piece of legal paper and figure out, okay, here's what we want to do. What's going to keep us from doing that? Do we not have the time to give it 100%, or because they'll only give back to you what you put into it. So it's that, being observant, and they'll let you know when they're comfortable. And if you have a good, healthy animal, we don't use any medicated feed. We have hardly any death loss, and that's just a good sign that we've got a good, healthy herd of rabbits, and that we're pretty much giving them everything they need. So, and you can buy automatic watering systems that kind of takes part of the chores out, but a lot of times I'll find that people don't check that they're actually getting water, and then if they don't get water, they don't eat. If they don't eat, they don't drink. So there's some crutches out there that make life easier, but you still have to do, visually hands-on with them and make sure everything's going good.
Right. Yeah. So in your book, you guys talk a little bit about experimenting with rabbit tractors, and you even have a section in there on setting up warrens or kind of more free range systems. And given the nature of bunnies and how they dig and they burrow and they kind of live underground, it seems like it's easier said than done. Can you guys talk a little bit about those two alternatives to raising bunnies?
It is often easier said than done. People like the idea of feeling like their rabbits are natural and free roam and everything like that. The domestic rabbit isn't the same species as the wild rabbit. So trying to expect the domestic to exist like the wild rabbit would in a free roam situation is not really realistic. They definitely need protection from predators. Whatever system you put them into, it's going to have to be able to be, secure. You can't have anything that's open top because hawks are going to appreciate that. Your neighbor's dogs, all sorts of things. And as far as digging, they do love to dig, and that is a huge challenge to doing an outdoor on the ground type system. We talk a little bit about what we called our rabbit tractors in the book, but even then we had to have wire down so that they couldn't dig out, something couldn't dig in to get them. And also just because of their love for digging, they can take a nice square of grass and turn it into, a dead zone fairly quickly.
Right.
So I'm not sure that directly answered your question, but those are some of the things that, people kind of need to think about. And also,
It doubles the time they're on feed.
yeah, it can definitely. And of course, every, region is different. Here, we weren't able to be as successful with it because it gets really hot in Kansas and grass stops growing. And so then when that happens, what are your rabbits going to eat? Someone with a much, more lush grass system might have better luck. But I totally lost my train of thought. So sorry about that.
And one of the things we saw too during that experiment was the rabbits basically started out the same size. And what you find is some rabbits will do better, some will lag back. And so they don't all finish at the same time. When they're on a pellet that's a balanced diet, that every time they take a bite, it's basically the same nutrients. So when they're out there on grass, they're gonna maybe find one grass that works better and they constantly eat that down to bare ground. And then you can almost double the amount of days it takes them to get to an ideal market weight versus being on pellet. And when we sent the meat off, blind tested several chefs, they didn't know what they were getting. They could tell the difference between the grass-fed ones because the meat was a little bit yellow, and we had New Zealand Zen, which aren't a heritage breed. They could tell a taste difference in them. They said that it was almost chalky tasting. So
definitely preferred the heritage breeds.
Yeah, and it's more labor intensive. You have to have the time to move the shelter that they're in on the grass, and then when they eat that, you got to move it again, and then you hope that you're not in a drought situation like we go through here pretty regular anymore, where there's nothing growing up behind it. So you basically harvest that grass off, and then you're going to have to get out the sprinkler system and start becoming Mother Nature. So depending on where you're at in the situation, how many you're doing, what your goals are from it, it has its advantages in some cases, but in a volume deal where we were doing it didn't become very cost effective.
Right.
The other thing too, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say the other thing, since part of our focus was on the heritage breed conservation, we had to know who was breeding who, when, and be able to keep track of that kind of thing, because when you only have a few genetic lines to work with, you need to be careful and make good decisions. And just turning a group into a warren system would have kind of defeated that purpose. So that was, another reason behind us not necessarily doing that type of production.
Right. And I've noticed with my rabbits, they're not great listeners. If you tell them to do one thing, they tend to do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think with those ears, they'd be better listeners, but not always the case.
So I'm curious, just for the stubborn person out there that wants to start a warren, how deep do these rabbits actually dig? I've always wondered that.
I have heard stories, and I can't back it up with personal experience. I have heard stories of a warren where the rabbits dug so deep, the woman who owned it had to basically stuff her kid down the hole to try to find the rabbits, and the kid got to where he could just barely reach the depth of the hole. It was probably like a 9-10-year-old kid, so that's probably a good 4 or 5 feet. Yeah. And they do love to dig.
There was a guy locally that tried to do a warren deal in a metal building, and he had a post on Craigslist trying to get rid of the rabbits, and it was basically they had completely destroyed the flooring in the barn, and you could have the rabbits that you captured. It was that bad. So he wasn't wanting anything for the rabbits. He was just wanting them
come and get them
evacuated from his ruined building. So they can be pretty destructive.
Would this be what ferrets were traditionally used for?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
They
So-
would muzzle the ferrets and then send
Ferret
them
'em out.
down. Yep. After the rabbits.
And so the ferret wouldn't be able to kill the rabbit; it would just chase it out of the hole, basically.
Right. Right. It would usually, rabbit tunnels can be complicated and have all sorts of little offshoots. So they'd send the ferret down one tunnel, the rabbit would be driven out of another tunnel, and then they'd have somebody there with a snare or something like that to catch the rabbits.
Huh. I've always wanted an excuse to get a ferret.
There you go.
So, okay, you guys breed all these heritage breeds. I love heritage breeds. We're involved in a farm. We do a lot of heritage fowl and poultry. And it sounds like there is a difference in the flavor between the hybrids, or I'm not sure what you want to call the New Zealand's, but relative to a heritage breed. And do you notice a difference in fat concentration, or you were saying that potentially the grass was changing some of the coloration of the fat? Like, do all rabbits taste the same?
Good.
I think they pretty much do. I think we've had people tell us that they thought the Blanc de Oto tasted a little sweeter, and there may be some subtle differences between the breeds. I don't have a sophisticated enough palate to be able to tease that out. But I mean, I think the rabbit meat itself is just really a good kind of sweet, mild, mellow meat, no matter what.
Well, it's virtually fat free.
Yeah.
They used to actually grade rabbit carcasses. The only fat that was available was almost an X on over their shoulders, and the amount of fat that was there and the width of the shoulder was how they graded them. You'll find fat will build up internally, and it'll basically strangle out their organs. And when you have a doe that doesn't breed, and you just constantly overfeed her and overfeed her and overfeed her, she starts laying fat on internally, because when you skin a rabbit, there's virtually no fat, and that's why it's kind of a unique animal to work with cooking, because you can basically do everything you can do with a chicken dish, you can make with rabbit, but with chicken having that skin on, it's a little forgiving for any heat mistakes. So it takes a little bit of practice to make sure that it'll dry out so fast, because you don't have anything to work with. So, but when we do have does that are non-producers, almost 90% of the time when you harvest those, and there's a picture in the book of one, the chest cavity, and it's totally filled up with fat. Now, some chefs would like for me to be able to raise a rabbit with back fat on it, because they like cooking with rabbit fat, but fat is not really good in rabbits, because you'll find it on the insides, and that usually will be why you have does that don't produce.
So will some rabbits store fat more readily than others in terms of breeds?
I don't think it makes too much difference as far as breed. I think it's more a management and a feeding thing. Most of the people that we've talked to that can't get their does to breed, we ask them, are you feeding them a certain amount, or are you just filling the feeders? And almost always the answer is, well, we're just filling the feeders. Well, they're like me at the buffet. They'll sit and eat until they can't eat anymore, and then they just, lay on a bunch of fat and aren't able to reproduce. I mean, Eric had a great analogy that you want to feed your breeding stock like they're athletes.
Right.
You can't be athletic and fit if you're down at the all-you-can-eat buffet.
Right.
You want to have a controlled diet that gives you all the things you need, but not so much that you get flabby and out of shape.
Right. So I have a totally crazy question. I was at a community potluck probably about 3 months ago, and this woman showed up who was an Indigenous woman from the north of Canada. And somehow we got on the topic of rabbits, and she was talking about how they raised rabbits for her whole life. And that her dad was brought up raising rabbits. And so she was brought up raising rabbits. And she said that the books on rabbits are all wrong. And that rabbits are actually not completely herbivores, and that they actually need a little bit of meat now and then, which completely blew me away, because I always thought rabbits were completely herbivorous. But she swore that rabbits need a small amount of animal protein in their diet. And when I thought about it a little bit more, I was like, well, maybe they're mimicking microbes that would naturally occur, or bugs that would be part of the diet accidentally. But what's your take on that?
Well, the rabbits are hardwired to, if they have a litter of rabbits and the litter dies for whatever reason, I've had does that will consume the entire litter. I mean, they'll have them and then one day they're gone. So they don't have a problem with eating their young, and that's meat. So, and that's just hardwired in them to clean the nest up. So if a predator comes along, I can get out of town and not have to worry about the babies. So, yeah. And they'll fight and they'll start chewing on each other. Some of the otos have a tendency to, when they're done with their litter, if you don't get them weaned, they'll start eating their ears, and they're a little more hyper rabbit. But yeah, and I've had a lot of people that are totally amazed when I'll tell them they'll eat entire litter, and that's just wired into them to clean the nest out.
I mean, biologically, their digestive system is made up to use fiber. Right. You know, and I'm curious, because I've heard that before. It's not been anything we've ever, experienced or found to be necessary. But I'm just wondering if the forage or whatever they're feeding their rabbits is maybe low enough in protein that adding that in just kind of helps, fill that gap. But I mean, I would not say that a rabbit on a good, adequate protein diet would need to have that supplement.
Protein coming from vegetable sources or herbaceous sources.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, sorry. I was just adding to your comment there that protein based on herbaceous sources.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Well, we initially in the birth of this was not going to feed a commercial feed pellet. I mean, that was just the goal. And searching through the books, there was in a 1933 version of the American Chinchilla handbook, a complete diet that was being used at the time in the industry, that was whole grains, ground hay, oats and stuff like that. And we were grinding and mixing, and I was running to co-ops, finding the individual ingredients, and was following it by the exact formula that was in there. And what we found was that rabbits are very picky eaters, and they were raking through the feeders and eating out of that what they wanted, and then the rest of it was going on the ground. Well, you take whole grains and drop it in a pile of rabbit manure. I had better row crops than some of the farmers around here, because and it was hard to clean up after it. And the rabbits you were seeing, some of them were doing halfway decent, and some of them were just not gaining any weight at all. So and the labor involved in the grinding and mixing of all that stuff. And then as we got a little bigger, it became more of a labor intensive item. So I started researching for a commercial pelleted feed that met the same nutrient requirements as what that whole ration was. And I found a local co-op that it was a nightmare trying to get that all in line and get quality pellets and get it to where it would work. And we've been on that same ration with the co-op that is basically making it for us forever. We've never switched feed, and the rabbits just do excellent on it, and it's easier to clean up the manure piles because you don't have anything other than manure under the pen. So they are picky eaters.
Right. So I'm curious, what's the perfect setup for a backyard, like someone who wants to get up into rabbitry on a backyard scale? Is it 2 does and $2? Is it 1 doe and $2? And then based on that, how much meat could they produce per year?
Well, as far as breeding,
Check your local laws.
yeah, first off, check your local laws. But to start out with, and what we've always tried to do, and especially with the heritage breeds, because you can't just go find a replacement animal. So what we always try to set people up with when they buy breeding stock from us is at the very least $2 and 2 does that are as unrelated as possible. A lot of people will ask for a trio, which is $1 and 2 does, but pretty quickly you're at a genetic dead end, because you'll then be, if you want to keep replacement stock, you're then going to be breeding your buck to his daughters, and you're going to be getting into some inbreeding depression fairly quickly. So if you can get a couple of bucks, you can cross back and forth for quite a while. And also, rabbits sometimes will just die for no apparent reason. And if you have 1 buck and he dies, you're pretty much done. So we always try to recommend people, start with a 2 pair or 2 trios if they're able to start at that level.
And I remember in your book, and I'm trying to remember the math, but you said it was it 2 rabbits equals 6 cages? Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So and so that's 1 for the doe, 1 for the buck, and then 1 for the females, 1 for the males, and then so that's 4. Where do the other 2 come in again?
If you want to keep any replacement does
Right.
or any replacement stock, you're going to have to at some point separate them.
And then you're also going to have at some point a pen for those misfit rabbits that don't, that aren't doing well, that might get picked on. So you can tweak that one way or the other, but that requirement number people kind of jump back when when you make a commitment to a trio or the quad of rabbits, how much space you need, and how much feed you're going to potentially need at the end of the line. And some people are satisfied with a pair. So, and then you've got more equipment involved, more chores involved. And but a lot of times the first thing to do is to really check if you're in town. There's rabbits are a quiet animal compared to, you don't run into a lot
they never
of
crow at dawn.
the poultry issues you do with city limits, but we do have times when people have told us that there's a limit on how many rabbits they can have in their backyard. And of course, if you're out in the country and you can have as many as you want, you can go crazy with it.
Yeah. I mean, the basic rule of thumb is you will never wish you had fewer pins. You're always going to wish you'd had more pins. So, kind of plan to have extra from the get-go.
Right. Cool. So we've got a ton of questions coming up here. So I only have one more question for you guys. So actually, based on the quad concept there, and then I have one more comment after this. And in a realistic world, if you're breeding them, I think you guys talk about how it's like 60 days between breeding your does, right? Does that sound right? Or is it a little bit longer than that? Well,
it depends. Most people do spring and fall breedings, and what that does, it depends on your climate. If you don't want rabbits in the heat or the cold, it lets you set out. Rabbits seem to do really good by being in a continuous cycle. What happens a lot of times is if you let them set out and you overfeed them and they get fat, well, then here we go back into, humans wanting them to turn the switch on. Okay, I want to breed you and have rabbits in March. And the doe's been sitting there eating, having a good time, and she's like, nope. Or something happens to your buck and he happens to go sterile in the heat, they'll majority of the time come back in if they do go sterile. But if he does, you're not going to find that out until you start breeding again. So it just depends on what program. We breed year round just for the numbers and to make cash flow, because feed bill is there whether you're bringing in income or not. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, totally. So twice a year, and then you expect what, 7 to 12 kits per doe?
12 is quite a few. I mean, they can do that. The American blue and white will regularly have like 10, 12 kits per litter.
Yeah.
But a good average that's not gonna, drain the doe is probably 8 or 9 kits.
We've had 17 in one litter, and there again, you need that when you're kind of penciling out your program. They can only feed so many babies. So if you keep shooting for large litters and don't have does that you can cross foster them off onto, the success of bottle feeding them is depends on the person and the patients, but it's usually not very successful. So that's the nice thing about if you are going to be a conservation breeder, is to have 2 different breeds, because you can cross foster those babies between breeds and keep your genetic lines intact. Where if you have all one breed, people have tried to Sharpie in their ears and toenail polish it, but that wears off. So if you're going to keep your integrity in those lines, it's good to have 2 breeds so you can work back and forth between them and cross foster.
Right. Cool. I know that Kathy's asked this question, and so we'll just quickly address it, and then we'll get into asking everyone else their questions. But one of the reasons we wanted micro livestock on our property was purely for the manure and the urine. And it sounds like you guys have done a lot of experimentation with growing gardens with this stuff. Can you talk a little bit about rabbit manure and why it's so great?
Part of the reason, I think, is because it's the food goes through the rabbit system twice. They eat it, they consume their night pellets, it goes through again, and then they pass the actual hard little bunny pellets that you're familiar with seeing. So it's basically like twice digested. So it breaks down really easy. It's usually high in all the good stuff that makes your garden grow. And we've just had great luck. Our garden beds are pretty much just straight rabbit manure that's just kind of broken down over the years. And we'll have tomato plants like taller than Eric's head. He's like almost 6 foot. So it really does a lot of good for the garden. And the nice thing about it is it's considered a cold manure. So it doesn't release all of its nitrogen at one time and burn the roots like some of the hotter ones that have to be composted. So it can literally go straight from the floor of the rabbit pen to the garden without having to go through that whole process.
Well, one of the unique things about our poo is we get our feed in paper feed sacks that have minimal printing on it. It's soy ink, and I shred that up, and that's what's used in our nest boxes, which virtually makes our rabbit manure weed free, because we're not using any bedding that has any seeds in it or noxious weeds or anything like that. So we have one nursery that several years ago started buying manure from us, and he had to kind of laugh because he was buying it in bulk and bagging it and selling it through his nursery. And what they had left, they were top dressing all their nursery stock with it. And he said his health was kind of complaining about having to do it. But then they started noticing that the plants that were not top dressed with the rabbit manure were not doing as well as the ones that were. And he said pretty soon his health was,
they were converted.
Yeah. And they started pushing the rabbit manure. So, and it's a good, we're working right now with pulverizing the manure and working with some green tea formulas that we can basically go down that line with selling the manure.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, just in the short period of time that we've had our rabbits, I've noticed a huge change in just how our compost is. I mean, we've chosen to compost it right now. We will be applying it directly to the garden. Actually, we've done a combination of both. The amount of material that these rabbits produce is unbelievable. They're just basically poop tubes. It's great.
Mhm.
It's awesome.
Well, we do a lot of have started doing a lot of container stuff, and our compost pile is probably on one side's a couple years old, and then you get to the fresh stuff. So we kind of do a blend of it, and you can potatoes, anything you drop in a container, it's amazing what you can get out of rabbit manure usage.
Yeah, I mean, I would grow these rabbits just for the manure itself. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
So guys, I've totally taken all your time here, and I know that people want to ask questions, so I'm going to stop asking questions and go back into the chat and ask questions, or bring the questions up to you so that I can share some of your time with them. I just have to say though that I really enjoyed reading this book, and if you guys are looking to get into rabbits, considering it, I've really enjoyed raising rabbits with my kids. It's a activity we do every morning. We go check the rabbits in the morning and at night. And it really provided a lot of bonding experiences with my kids. It's allowed us to bring the farm into the urban setting, and it's been on my list for a long time, and I'm glad I finally did it. And it's been incredible to be able to pick your brains, guys. It's been a really interesting interview, and I've got probably 15 more questions that we're not gonna have time to get to today. So before we get to questions, and I'll start relaying some of them to you guys. Why don't we just, Sarah, do you want to hop back on to Zoom there, and we'll announce the winner of the book from today's interview.
Okay, that was really excellent, and it was a lot of fun for me to join in the comments, and people asked questions I hadn't thought of, and it was really great to be a part of that online community. So thanks everybody that joined in. And I think today's winner is Seek to Find, just for helping out with some really good points and questions and helping to answer people's questions about cold climate rabbits. So
awesome. Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna stick my email address into the chat window here, and Seek to Find, if you can send us an email at info@vergepermaculture.ca, we'll get all the details sorted out with you and make sure you get a copy of that book. If you guys are interested in purchasing the book, I've put a link in the show notes below that you can follow to purchase the book. If you're on the Verge Permaculture Ideas newsletter, that link is also in the show notes below. We'll be sending out an email after this interview with a 25% discount code for this book. So that is only valid for 48 hours after the interview ends. So if you want to take advantage of that, go and purchase that book right away, and you'll get access to that coupon code. So let's get into some of these questions here. There's a lot of great comments. Did any comments stand out for you, Sarah, that you wanted to, you were probably watching them a little bit closer than I was?
Yeah, and because of that, I may not have been listening as closely as I could have, but a lot of people were wondering about breeds for colder weather, and also about prey, dealing with, in particular, one person wondered about bears. So.
All right. So are there any breeds that are better at dealing with the cold weather than others? And generally speaking, how do rabbits manage the cold?
Rabbits actually manage cold quite a bit better than they do hot. Their body's compact, and as long as they've got a thick fur coat and they're protected from drafts, they handle cold really well. I mean, even down, sub-freezing temperatures, as long as they're out of like wet and wind, they handle it real well. So I don't know that there's a breed that's particularly better at that. On the flip side, as far as heat, you want to make sure rabbits have a good big ear, because that ear serves as a radiator in hot climates. So
i.e. the jackrabbit.
i.e. the jackrabbit. So but most breeds of rabbit will handle cold really well.
Okay. All right. Dave Beatty asks, I'd like to know how many rabbits I could put together in a single place, separating the bucks and does. I'd like to get as close to free range within an urban homestead. So I feel like that comment might be contradicting itself a little bit, but did that make sense to you guys? Or
I think it did. I think a lot, and this really isn't a clear answer, so I'm sure I'm going to disappoint the questioner, but a lot of it will depend on the disposition of the rabbits that you're trying to put together and how well those individuals get along. Sometimes you'll be really lucky and you'll start with a group of rabbits that get along from the get-go, and sometimes it's just nothing but rabbit fights. So I think, unfortunately, that is something I can't give a magic number on. It's something you're just going to have to kind of trial and error.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind with rabbits is most breeds will sexually mature at 4 to 5, 6 month range. And that's the key purpose for split sexing them. If you leave the males and females together, say the entire litter, what'll end up happening if you don't get that separated in that window, the fight's on. And you can take 2 bucks that are brothers and raise them from the time they're born clear up to you want to pull them out and put them into production, they'll do fine. And then you may go out there one day and they've decided they don't like each other. But normally, if you don't split sex them and they're allowed to that competition, they'll actually bucks will actually castrate each other by striking them with their back feet.
Right. Sounds like you guys need a t-shirt with the Rare Hare Barn logo on it that says "It depends." I find that's an answer I give a whole lot in my work, is it always does depend. There's so many contextual things that are hard to wrap your head around. All right, let's get to the next question here. Have you guys experienced much with whatchamacallit? The question that spawning this question, I can't, my brain's not working right now. Are those supersized bunnies good for eating? What Flemish Giants? Do you guys have any experience with Flemish Giants?
Not very much. And really the answer is all rabbits are made of meat. It just depends on what your resource is. The larger breeds take a little while longer to get to mature weight. Yeah, they're going to take bigger equipment, but Flemish Giants are a good meat breed.
They were kind of back in the rabbit breeding days. You'll find a lot of them are used in the genetic makeup of. They just they took the good qualities of those big rabbits and didn't want big rabbits, but they kind of scaled it down. And so a lot of the most feed efficient heritage meat breeds, you'll go back and find out there's Flemish Giant or Checkered Giants or something in their origination.
Right.
But they'll get up 18 to 20 pounds and
that's a lot of rabbit.
It's a lot of feed. The equipment's got to be able to hold up that size of rabbit.
Right. Yeah. So Northern Bloom asks, I'm located in a bear heavy area and small livestock can be an issue. Any tips on keeping rabbits bear proof?
I couldn't even begin to answer that. The only bears I've ever seen are at the zoo. So whatever it is electric wire.
Yeah.
I was thinking, make sure you don't put any honey on their fur.
Yeah.
I think Northern Bloom, probably all the same rules apply for any livestock. So same with chickens as with rabbits. You've got there's actually, I know in British Columbia, there's a Bear Smart course that you can take. And there's some pretty neat innovations around 3D fencing that might be really effective with bears. So check that out, 3D fencing. So Kathy, and I think we probably already addressed this, but she asks, we have a suitable outbuilding perfect for raising rabbits, but concerned about them getting frostbite and hypothermia. I'd like to get heritage breeds suited for our northern climate. So I want to add a small component to that question. Do you guys ship your heritage breeds up to Canada?
We never have.
To Canada?
Yeah, to Canada. Oh, the blood. I'm sorry. I was thinking of the meat. Yes, we have shipped rabbits to Canada.
Okay, cool. All right. So if you
we actually had a breeder that drove all the way down, and we replenished their breeding stock for the north basically by him coming down. We picked out rabbits and bred them so we could spread out that genetic line as far as we could. So we sent bred rabbits back to Canada, and I think he's got some of our bloodline is clear up in Newfoundland now from the stuff we sent to Canada. And the first batch went by air, and we called it the Great Hair Lift.
Awesome. So I am curious. Mark Berg asks here, what's the most humane way to dispatch the rabbits?
We prefer the rabbit ringer. It's something you can order online, or if you're handy with a welder, you can build one yourself, and there's information on that in the book. But what it does is cervically dislocate, and it is the quickest, most humane method in our opinion. It's over before the rabbit barely even knows he's been picked up.
Right. Okay, cool. The rabbit ringer. All right. So Kathy asks, what are some common diseases / ailments affecting meat rabbits?
Probably one of the most common one is snuffles. And that is just, rabbits don't get colds, but the virus that causes snuffles is pretty much present in most rabbits. It's just when they're stressed that will start to express itself by a snotty nose, and some other things. That's probably one of the most common ones we've seen. And another one is if a rabbit isn't getting a diet that's high enough in fiber, that can cause some enteritis and some digestive upsets. That's another one that our pellets are high enough in fiber. We haven't seen that very often, but it does happen. What were you going to suggest? Did I get it? I got it. Yay.
We just got a bunny and definitely had some ear mites. So we've been dealing with that, as you suggest in your book, with mineral oil. But that's one that's I don't have much experience, but I had a bunny with mites, and it's not pleasant for them, I think.
No, it's not.
All right. Another question from Northern Bloom. I've heard about many people raising rabbits for fresh dog food as well, but I've heard contradicting argument that rabbits don't have enough fat for dogs. Do you have any experience with that?
It's not something we have done. I do know rabbits are low in fat, so I really can't speak to that too terribly much. I know rabbit is a real popular raw food, but I don't know if people have to supplement.
Okay. Mrs. Micah asks, what types of grasses or herbs should be planted to feed the rabbit? So I guess she's getting at self-supply here.
Right. And yeah, that's something I hesitate to answer because we don't have a lot of direct experience with that.
Native grass here.
I know a lot of the old books said that rabbits were fed beetroot and kale and things like that. The main thing you want to avoid are watery greens like iceberg lettuce. There's not enough fiber or anything in them to do the rabbit any good digestively and give them scours and things like that. So I think there are all sorts of options, but having not done that myself, I hesitate to offer advice.
Right. Okay. I'm curious, did you guys hear about the big disease outbreak on Vancouver Island last year?
We did, yes.
And what was that all about?
Rabbit hemorrhagic disease. It's a pretty bad, highly contagious disease that I think causes intestinal issues.
Yeah, diarrhea.
And
dehydration.
Right. And it's pretty serious business.
Right. Okay. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of the question period. Just before I let you guys go, I just have to say that I've really enjoyed reading your book. And if you guys are looking for a great book on getting started with rabbits, I highly recommend Raising Rabbits for Meat. And like I said, you can find all the details in the show notes below. If you guys found this interview useful and helpful, please hit the like button, give us a thumbs up, and feel free to share it on any of your social media streams. Do you guys have any closing thoughts or closing thoughts that you want to leave the group with?
Well, we'd just like to, thank everybody for being here and asking questions. We'd also really love to thank Sarah and New Society for making it happen. And the chapter in the book that is titled, "What's Your Plan?" That's basically the advice I think we'd like to leave people with is I totally recommend getting into rabbits, but do your homework and have a plan and know what your goals are before you start in.
Absolutely. Sarah, did you have any closing thoughts before we close out today?
I just wanted to thank everybody for their time. Definitely Eric and Callene. We don't always get to meet our authors in person. I guess this is the next best thing. So it's really lovely to spend the time with you, and you as well, Rob, and everybody that joined in. It's just really nice to be able to share this kind of information and help people get started on their way.
Right. I have one more question for Eric and Callene. Do you guys ever offer tours of your operation?
By special appointment.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And hope all of you guys in the YouTube sphere got lots out of this interview. Check out their website at Rare Hare Barn. You can Google that, and highly recommend getting their book. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you guys all on the next live stream, which is happening in 2 weeks. So if you're on our newsletter, you get notified. And we're going to be talking with Dmitry Orlov on the 5 stages of collapse. It should be a very interesting and engaging conversation. Been wanting to chat with Dmitry for a long time. Okay, guys, have a great evening. We'll see you guys all real soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.